Okay, so imagine this for a second. You're a diplomat. You've spent, what, months prepping for the World Economic Forum in Davos? You've got your briefing books, your talking points on carbon credits, your whole schedule of polite, fireside chats with allies. You pack your best suit, you head to the Swiss Alps, and you're expecting the usual.
The standard Davos man experience. Cautious optimism, maybe a little boring, but predictable.
Totally predictable. But then you land in Switzerland, January 2026, and the script hasn't just been flipped. It's been absolutely shredded. You aren't walking into an economic summit anymore.
Oh.
You're walking into a geopolitical cage match. And the prize isn't some trade deal. It's the sovereignty of the entire Arctic. And the person in charge isn't maintaining order. He's planting flags on other people's territory.
It sounds like hyperbole, doesn't it? But we've been going through this fascinating and, frankly, alarming stack of reports, video summaries, and leaked documents coming out of Davos right now. And the picture they paint is visceral. We're looking at a summit that is so much less about economic cooperation and more about a geopolitical hostile takeover.
Visceral is exactly the right word. Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we are unpacking what our sources are calling the Davos disconnect. We're looking at a reported breakdown in Western unity that is so severe we have leaks of heads of state insulting each other over text. We have maps that look like something out of a 19th century history book, and economic threats that are set to detonate in just a matter of days.
And for you listening, this really matters because it's not just political theater. The sources we're analyzing suggest we are watching the real-time fracturing of the alliance structure that has, basically governed the West since World War II.
Right.
We're talking about the U.S. delegation apparently isolating itself, threats of massive tariffs on allies, and a sort of counter-coalition forming up in the North.
It's a lot to process. So let's map this out for a minute. We're going to start with the spark, the leaks, and the visuals that really set the tone. Then we'll move to the Northern Alliance, how Canada and Europe are actually physically responding.
Okay.
And we really need to spend some time on the economic side, specifically this battery argument and the tariff threats. And then finally, we'll look at the Board of Peace and the domestic blowback from Gavin Newsom.
It's a heavy stack of material, but the narrative is incredibly clear once you start to connect the dots.
So let's start with that spark. Usually diplomacy happens behind closed doors, right? You smile for the cameras and then you hash things out in private.
Yeah.
But the reporting on this summit describes a rude awakening for the U.S. delegation that started before they even sat down. And the headline here is, French President Emmanuel Macron refusing to meet with Donald Trump. That's highly irregular.
It is. And the reason our sources give is even more unusual. It comes down to a breach of, digital privacy. We're looking at a report that alleges President Trump leaked private text messages from Macron.
Okay, let's unpack that, because leaked texts sounds like high school drama, not, the G7. What was actually in these messages?
Well, in the screenshots described, Macron was actually being quite diplomatic. He was asking basically, what are you doing with Greenland?
Just a simple question.
Yeah, he expressed confusion over the U.S. moves regarding the island, which we'll get to in a moment. And he suggested they discuss it over dinner. It was a standard, let's talk this out kind of approach.
Polite, let's break bread and figure this out text.
Exactly. But instead of a reply, the source says the screenshot was just posted to social media. And that's the breach.
Wow.
In the world of high-stakes diplomacy, that expectation of privacy is the only thing that lets leaders be candid. So if a private let's talk text becomes public content, that channel just closes.
It's basically burning the bridge just to light a cigarette. And I'm guessing the reaction was swift.
Immediate. Macron reportedly sent a follow-up, which was also leaked, saying, I ain't gonna meet with you. And it wasn't just him. The source mentioned similar leaks involving NATO Secretary General. The strategy seems to have been to, shame these leaders publicly, to show them who's boss.
But the result was the opposite.
Right. The result described in the report is that the U.S. delegation just found itself isolated. The traditional allies just stopped engaging.
But it wasn't just the text, was it? The visual component here is what really, it jumped out at me. The source video describes a map that President Trump posted, and this is not a standard National Geographic map.
Not at all. The description is quite specific. It showed the United States, but the coloring indicated U.S. control or, dominance over Canada, Greenland, Cuba, and Venezuela.
That is just bold. It's almost like a visual representation of a supercharged Monroe Doctrine. Like, everything on this side of the Atlantic is mine.
It's pure expansionist imagery. And it was paired with a photo that the source claims shows President Trump, Vice President J.D. Vance, and Secretary of State Marco Rubio literally planting an American flag in Greenland.
Which is where that moon landing comparison comes in. When you plant a flag, you aren't visiting. You're not negotiating a lease. You're claiming something.
Precisely. And that visual, it signals to everyone else in the room, the Danes, the Canadians, the EU, that this whole discussion about purchasing Greenland isn't a business proposal anymore. It's a statement of intent. It's a claim of sovereignty.
And the rhetoric matched the visuals. I want to dig into this enemy within comment that was mentioned in the report. We've all heard that phrase used in domestic politics, but here it was applied internationally.
That's the key shift. The source highlights a speech where the administration labeled the UN and NATO as a cult.
A cult? NATO.
Yes. The argument presented was that while China and Russia are competitors, boogeymen, I think was the word they used, the real threat to American greatness is the international rules-based order itself.
So the system itself is the enemy.
Exactly. They are framing the alliance structure not as a safety net, but as a constraint, a cult that the U.S. needs to break free from.
That is a massive pivot. Usually you go to Davos to shore up alliances against your competitors. Here, the argument is that the alliances are the enemy. How do the markets take this? Because usually money hates chaos.
Poorly. Very poorly. The source notes that stocks dropped and yields rose immediately after these comments.
Just to clarify for everyone listening, when we say yields rose, can you give us the quick and dirty on why that matters so much?
Sure. When investors get nervous, they sell off government bonds. When they sell bonds, the price goes down, and the yield, or the interest rate the government has to pay to borrow money, goes up. So basically, the market is saying, the world just got a lot riskier, so if you want to borrow our money, you're going to have to pay us more for it.
So the president calls NATO a cult, and suddenly the cost of U.S. mortgages and the national debt payments get more expensive.
That's the chain of events. Stability keeps yields low. Instability, especially when you attack your own security architecture, makes money expensive.
So you have the U.S. pushing this really aggressive, isolationist yet expansionist narrative. Naturally, physics applies here. For every action, there's a reaction. The source calls it the Northern Alliance, who is stepping up. Because, Europe can sometimes be a bit slow to react.
Surprisingly, the spearhead seems to be Canada. We often think of Canada as the polite mediator, right? The nice neighbor.
Mm-hmm.
But Prime Minister Carney came out swinging.
I noted that phrase he used, boots on the ice.
It's a great turn of phrase, isn't it? But it implies something very serious. Carney explicitly stated that Canada stands with Greenland and Denmark. He's invoking the concept of Arctic sovereignty.
But it's not just words.
No, and that's the key. The source quotes him referencing unprecedented investments in submarines and over-the-horizon radar.
Over-the-horizon radar sounds technical, but in the Arctic, that's your eyes and ears. That's early warning stuff.
It is. And by pairing that with submarines, Carney is signaling that Canada is willing to militarize the North to protect its claims. He's essentially applying a kind of Article 5 mutual defense to the Arctic flank. He's saying, we will defend this territory.
It's a wild mental image. Canada mobilizing a fleet to stare down the U.S. And they weren't the only ones using fighting words. The Belgian Prime Minister. That quote was heavy.
A miserable slave.
Yeah. He said countries have a choice between self-respect and being a miserable slave.
That is exceptionally stark language for a European diplomat. Usually they talk about cooperation and challenges.
Mm.
To use the word slave implies that the relationship with the U.S. has fundamentally changed.
Right.
He's framing it as a dignity issue. If Europe accepts these new terms, the maps, the flag planting, they aren't allies anymore. They are vassals.
So the rhetoric is heating up. But what about the money? The EU isn't known for its military might, but it has a massive checkbook.
Right, and that's exactly the play. Ursula von der Leyen, the president of the EU Commission, announced a massive European investment surge in Greenland. It's a smart countermove. The U.S. is trying to exert pressure. The EU is trying to buy loyalty, or at least stability. They are pouring money into Greenland's infrastructure to make the local economy robust enough to resist American economic coercion.
So it's a bidding war for an island, but one side is using threats and the other is using grants.
In a way. And Macron tried to elevate it philosophically. He gave a speech contrasting respect to bullies with rule of law to brutality. He's trying to position Europe as the adult in the room, the stable, predictable alternative to the chaos coming from the U.S. delegation.
But being the adult is hard when the other guy's threatening to cut off your allowance. And this brings us to the economic battery pun, fully intended. The source spent a lot of time on Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick and Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent.
Yes.
Let's talk about Lutnick first. He was on a panel.
He was, and the source described the reaction from the other panelists as just disgust. Lutnick made this very specific argument about energy and manufacturing. He claimed that Europe doesn't make a battery.
Now, just fact-checking that in real time, Europe obviously makes batteries. I mean, Northvolt, the gigafactories in Germany. So what did he mean by that?
It wasn't a literal statement. It was a rhetorical attack on their whole energy philosophy.
Yeah.
His argument, as our source presented it, went like this. The U.S. has massive oil and gas reserves. So switching to electric is stupid for the U.S. because it ignores a natural advantage. China, on the other hand, doesn't have oil, so for them, electric is logical.
Okay, I followed the logic so far. He's saying play to your strengths.
Right. But then he pivoted to Europe. He argued that Europe is basically subservient to China's supply chain, that because they're pushing for green energy without having that raw resource dominance, they've made themselves dependent. They don't make a battery with shorthand for, you don't control your own energy destiny.
It's an attempt to delegitimize their entire economic model. He's saying their Green Deal isn't a strategy, it's a surrender to China.
Exactly. And while the Europeans were still reeling from that philosophical attack, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent came in with the hammer.
The February 1st deadline.
This is the most concrete threat in the entire report. Bessent reportedly announced a 10% tariff to be implemented on February 1st. But look at the targeting. It's not a blanket tariff.
No, it's surgical.
It's specifically against the 8 countries that sent troops to Greenland, even called out the Danes by name.
That is just incredibly specific. It's weaponized economics. Get your troops off the ice or we tax your exports.
It is. And the most chilling part for the international audience there was his confidence. When a reporter asked him if he was worried about retaliation, if the EU or the UK had any tools to fight back, he didn't spin it. He didn't offer some nuanced answer.
What did he say?
He just said no.
Just no.
Just
That implies a worldview where the U.S. economy is so dominant that Europe can't hurt us. It's the too big to fail argument, but applied to a trade war.
It's a game of chicken. But Bessent seems to believe the U.S. is driving a tank and Europe is on a bicycle. He thinks the asymmetry is so great that they have no choice but to fold.
Which is a very high-risk bet when you're dealing with the collective economy of the EU. Now, if that wasn't enough to make your head spin, we have the Board of Peace. This part felt surreal, like something out of a satire.
It really does. According to the source, President Trump announced the formation of a Board of Peace and invited Vladimir Putin and Alexander Lukashenko, the president of Belarus, to join it.
The leaders of Russia and Belarus, while they are invading Ukraine, on a Board of Peace.
You can just imagine the reception. Ukrainian President Zelensky was there, and he reportedly said, I'm not going to be on a Board of Peace with someone who is invading my country, which is, a fairly logical objection.
It's hard to argue with that one, but how did the U.S. administration respond to Zelensky's refusal? Or, say, Macron's hesitation?
With more transactional threats. The source reports that when Trump was told Macron might not want to join a board with Putin, the response was, well, I'll put a 200% tariff on his wines and champagnes, and he'll join.
So, sit next to Putin, or I will destroy your wine industry.
That's the dynamic. It reduces these incredibly complex moral and security issues to a simple transaction. It completely bypasses values, history, or international law. It's just pure leverage. I have the market, you have the product, do what I say, or you lose the market.
Speaking of leverage and consistency, the source brought up a fascinating point about Diego Garcia. This is an island in the Indian Ocean, right?
Yes, the Chagos Archipelago. It's a tiny spot on the map, but it is home to a critical U.S. military base that supports operations all across the Middle East. And recently, the U.K. agreed to transfer sovereignty to Mauritius while keeping the base operational. Trump attacked this deal at Davos, calling it total weakness and great stupidity.
Which fits the strongman brand. He doesn't like giving up territory, but the expert in our source pointed out a bit of a snag.
A massive contradiction. They played a clip of Marco Rubio, who is now Secretary of State, from just 7 months prior. In that statement, the Trump team explicitly supported the deal. They called it a monumental achievement that secured the base's long-term future.
7 months ago, it was a monumental achievement. Now it's total weakness.
It creates a kind of vertigo for allies. I mean, if the U.S. position on a strategic treaty can flip 180 degrees in 7 months based purely on political wins, how do you sign anything? how do you plan for the next decade?
You can't.
The source argues that this unpredictability is actually more damaging than the hostility. You can plan for an enemy, you can't plan for chaos.
And amidst all these world leaders, there was one American voice pushing back from the sidelines. And it wasn't a federal official. It was Gavin Newsom, the governor of California. What was he even doing at Davos?
Ostensibly, he represents the world's fifth largest economy. But politically, he was acting as a sort of shadow diplomat, or maybe a critic-in-chief. His interview was incredibly aggressive.
I have the quote here. He said he should have brought knee pads for the world leaders because they are rolling over.
It's a vulgar image, but it was calculated. He accused them of being supine, of handing out crowns and Nobel Prizes to people who are actively undermining them.
So he's essentially shaming them. A U.S. governor traveling to Switzerland to tell foreign heads of state to grow a backbone against his own president.
It just highlights the deep domestic fracture in the U.S. Newsom is using the international stage to rally opposition. He's telling Europe, don't normalize this. Don't think this is just standard negotiations. Stand up. It's an attempt to stiffen their resolve, perhaps because he knows that if Europe folds, the domestic opposition back in the U.S. loses its leverage too.
So let's try to pull all of this together. We have a summit that was supposed to be about global economics, and it turns into a scene from some dystopian thriller. We have maps showing U.S. dominance of the hemisphere, flags planted on Greenland, tariffs threatened for February 1st, and a peace board that includes Putin.
When you step back and look at the so what of this deep dive, it really is about the cost of transactionality. For decades, the West operated on an institutional model. We are allies because we share values and long-term interests.
Yeah.
What the source describes is a shift to a purely transactional model. What can you give me today? If you don't give it, I will hurt you.
And the reaction to that is the fragmentation we're seeing. That Northern Alliance isn't just about the Arctic, it's about survival.
Exactly. We assume alliances like NATO are permanent, like mountain ranges. But they're actually like contracts. They only work if both sides agree to the terms. When you introduce existential threats like the NATO is a cult comment or the wine terrorists into security relationships, the whole structure just starts to wobble.
And the scary part is the timeline. We aren't talking about theoretical shifts over the next decade. We are talking about February 1st.
That's just days away. If those 10% tariffs hit the countries with troops in Greenland, we are effectively in a trade war between the U.S. and its closest military allies. That changes the cost of goods, it changes supply chains, and it fundamentally changes the security map of the world.
It really is a rapidly developing story. The source material paints a picture of a world on the brink of a major shift, driven by personality, strategy, and a whole lot of chaos.
And for you, the listener, the final thought to maybe mull over is this. The U.S. administration seems to be betting that its leverage is absolute, that it doesn't need friends, only subjects. But history suggests that isolation works until the moment you really, really need help. That confidence of, no, they won't retaliate is a powerful drug, but the hangover can be brutal.
That is a thought that will keep you up at night. We will be watching very closely to see if those tariffs actually drop on February 1st. This story is moving fast, and the economic implications are just massive. That's all for this deep dive into the Davos disconnect.